Margaret Hayes stood in the ornate bridal suite of the Riverside Grand Hotel, her fingers trembling as she held the note. The carefully penned words swam before her eyes. "I cannot go through with this. I'm sorry, Margaret. You deserve better than a lie." Bradley, she was 53 years old. Her fiancé of 2 years had left her at the altar. A breath, a moment of silence. The wedding planner knocked softly. "Miss Hayes? The guests are wondering—" Margaret looked at her reflection. The ivory lace dress, purchased with such hope 6 months ago, now felt like a costume for a play that had been abruptly canceled. Her daughter Sarah had helped her choose it, running her fingers over the delicate beadwork with tears of joy in her eyes. "Tell them," Margaret said quietly, "that there won't be a wedding today." A gentle transition. The whispers started immediately, of course. In a town like Willow Creek, news traveled faster than kindness. Margaret spent 3 days in her small cottage, curtains drawn, living on tea and the casseroles her neighbor Mrs. Chen left on the porch. On the 4th day, she made a decision. She would not hide. She would not let shame define her autumn years. A warm, knowing pause. Margaret had worked as a librarian for 30 years before retiring. She knew that every story had unexpected chapters, and perhaps hers was simply taking a turn she hadn't anticipated. That morning, she dressed in a simple blue sundress, pulled her silver-streaked brown hair into a soft bun, and walked to the town square. The farmers' market was in full swing. Families browsed tables of fresh produce and handmade crafts. Margaret bought tomatoes from the Garcia family stand, accepting their kind smiles without flinching from their sympathy. That's when she saw him. A slight pause, a gentle shift. James Cooper was standing beside a modest pickup truck, loading bags of organic soil for Mrs. Patterson, who lived 3 streets over. Margaret had seen him around town for years, a quiet man in his late 50s with weathered hands and an unassuming manner. He worked as a groundskeeper and handyman, always in worn jeans and flannel shirts, his sandy gray hair slightly too long, touching his collar. "Let me get that for you, Mrs. Patterson," he was saying, his voice warm and patient as he helped the elderly woman with her parcels. Margaret watched him work, noticing the gentle way he made sure Mrs. Patterson was steady on her feet before she drove away. There was a kindness in his movements, an ease with being helpful that seemed as natural as breathing. A thoughtful pause. Their eyes met across the square. James offered a small, respectful nod. No pity, no curiosity, just simple acknowledgement. Margaret found herself walking toward him, though she couldn't have said why. "You're James Cooper, aren't you?" she asked. "You fixed my porch steps last spring." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, a slight smile touching his eyes. "Margaret Hayes, I hope those steps are still holding up well." "They are." "You do good work." A gentle breath. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Around them, the market bustled with weekend energy, but in their small circle, there was a pocket of calm. "I heard about your wedding," James said finally, his voice low and respectful. "I'm sorry for your trouble." Margaret appreciated that he didn't pretend not to know. "Thank you. It's been an adjustment." "I imagine so." He shifted the bag of soil in his truck bed. "My wife passed 11 years ago. Cancer. I learned that sometimes life takes the plans we make and tosses them right out the window. But the sun still comes up the next day." A warm, understanding pause. There was wisdom in his simple words, earned through his own sorrows. Margaret felt something loosen in her chest, the tight knot of embarrassment and shame that had been sitting there for days. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" she heard herself ask. James looked surprised, then genuinely pleased. "I would like that very much." A gentle transition. Slower now, they met at Rosie's Cafe 3 days later. James arrived in clean jeans and a pressed shirt, his hair combed back, and Margaret wore a lavender blouse her daughter had given her for her birthday. They talked for 2 hours, their coffee growing cold. James told her about his late wife, Anna, and how they'd built a simple life together filled with small joys, Sunday drives, crossword puzzles at the kitchen table, a garden they tended together, Margaret shared her years at the library, her love of old novels, her daughter who lived 2 hours away and called every Sunday. Bradley wanted me to sell my cottage, Margaret confessed. He said we should buy something bigger, more impressive. But I love my little house. My mother's rose bushes are in the garden. I've read on that porch swing for 20 summers. Never let anyone make you give up the things that hold your heart, James said simply. A knowing pause. They began seeing each other regularly. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. James would stop by on Saturday mornings to help with her garden, refusing payment but accepting glasses of lemonade and conversation. Margaret would pack extra sandwiches when she went to the park to read, and they'd sit together on a bench, talking about books and weather and memories. 6 weeks after they met, James mentioned he needed to travel to the county clerk's office for some property paperwork. Margaret went along for the company. While they were there, standing in the quiet government building with its fluorescent lights and scuffed floors, James turned to her with a serious expression. "Margaret," he said, "I know this might sound peculiar, but I've grown mighty fond of you these past weeks. I'm 60 years old, and I learned after Anna died that time is precious. Would you consider marrying me? Nothing fancy, just something simple and real. We could be companions, look after each other. No pressure, no expectations beyond friendship and kindness." A long, emotional pause. Margaret looked at this gentle man with his calloused hands and honest eyes. There was no pretense in him, no hidden agenda, just a straightforward offer of companionship in the second half of life. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I think I would like that very much." They were married 20 minutes later by a clerk who'd been performing civil ceremonies for 30 years. The witness was a young woman waiting for her own paperwork, who cried happy tears and took a photo with Margaret's phone. A gentle, warm transition. Margaret's daughter Sarah drove down that evening, equal parts shocked and bemused. "Mom, you married a man you've known for 6 weeks? You haven't even lived together. You don't know anything about him!" "I know he's kind," Margaret said calmly. "I know he listens when people speak. I know he helped Mrs. Patterson with her groceries without being asked, and he fixed Mr. Chen's fence last winter when it fell down and wouldn't take payment. I know he loved his wife for 32 years and still gets misty-eyed when he talks about her." "That tells me what kind of man he is," Sarah softened. "Are you happy, Mom?" "I'm at peace," Margaret replied. "That's better than I've felt in a very long time." A thoughtful pause. James moved into Margaret's cottage the following week with just 2 suitcases and a box of books. They settled into an easy rhythm. James would make coffee in the morning while Margaret cooked breakfast. They'd work in the garden together in the evenings and read side by side on the porch as the sun set. 3 months into their marriage, Margaret noticed an envelope on the kitchen table addressed to her. Inside was a check from the county treasurer's office, a substantial quarterly payment. She found James in the garden, pruning the rose bushes. "James," she said carefully, "there's a rather large check on the table." "From the county?" He looked up, his expression sheepish. "Ah, yes. I should have mentioned that." A gentle revelation. "I own some land," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Quite a bit of it, actually. My grandfather bought up property during the Depression when nobody else could afford it. Passed it to my father, who passed it to me. The county leases most of it. There's a wind farm on the north section and some farmland on the east. It generates income." Margaret sat down on the garden bench. "How much land?" "About 800 acres. He sat beside her. "I've never touched the principal, just lived off what I made working. Anna and we preferred simple living. After she passed, I kept doing what I'd always done. The money's just sitting in accounts, growing. I don't need much to be happy." A pause, a breath. "You're telling me," Margaret said slowly, "that you're wealthy?" "On paper, I suppose." "But Margaret, I want you to know, I married you for companionship, for your kindness and your good heart. The money doesn't define me. It never has. I'm still just a man who likes working with his hands and having someone to share supper with." Margaret looked at this extraordinary, ordinary man beside her. "You could have told me. Would it have mattered?" A warm pause. She considered this. "No," she said finally. "It wouldn't have." You're the same man who helped Mrs. Patterson with her groceries and fixed my porch steps. Money doesn't change character. Exactly, James said gently.